Hi guys, welcome to lesson 8.1, and we are going to be talking about completing the square. So if you have an equation like this, it's great. Like we know what to do. So we're gonna like subtract 2 and divide by 5, and we end up getting x minus 1 squared equals 4. And you take the square root, x minus 1 equals plus or minus 2. We add 1 to both sides, so x equals 1 plus or minus 2. So x equals 1 plus 2, which is 3, and 1 minus 2, which is negative 1. Okay, so that is great, but what if it's not in this form and we need to kind of move it around? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And like I said, this is a review, so you should have had this in Algebra 2. So what I want you to do right now, I'm going to push pause, and I want you to factor each of these 4 expressions and see if you can do that. Okay, so hopefully you got all these and you saw that they're all perfect square trinomials. So what jumps out to me, how I know it's a perfect square trinomial, or maybe I should say how I have a hunch that's a perfect square trinomial, is that I can take the square root of this and the square root of this. And so like those, the last term square root goes here and here, and the first term square root goes here and here. Same thing with this one. Look, I can take the square root, and that's going to be my second term down here, and the square root of y squared is y. So all of those are the same, and then I'll always check it to make sure. So let's do this one really quickly. So when I multiply these together, I get negative 5 halves y, and then I have another negative 5 halves y. So when I combine those, I get negative 10 halves y, which is the same thing as negative 5. So I always make sure that it ends up being that middle term. But that's kind of my thought process through the perfect square binomial. Okay, so knowing what we did up here, I want you to see if you can turn it into a problem that looks similar, something similar to this. So think about this. This is that perfect square trinomial that we just saw. So right here. So see what you can do with that. Okay, so hopefully you saw, and we just did it up here, that this right here is the same thing as this, which is the same thing as x plus 4 squared. And so I turned it into this equation, and so I'm going to take the square root. So x plus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 14, and then I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides, and x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 14. Okay, so we're going to take it back a step more. We have to have a perfect square trinomial. So these are exactly what we want them to do to fit them into equation like this. So let's force like all of these into a perfect square trinomial. So what number would go here? So it'd be x plus or minus something squared. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out is that this is going to determine what your sign is in your once it's factored. So this is going to be x plus something squared. This is going to be x minus something squared. Okay, so the formula, what we're going to do to find this is we're going to take this term, so remember that's our b term, and we're going to divide it by 2, and we're going to square it. So let's come up here, and I want to show you what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to take this one. So I'm going to take my b term, and I'm going to divide it by 2, which is 4, and I'm going to square that 4, which is 16. So that's how we're going to find that middle term. So I'm going to do the same thing with this negative 5. I don't care about the negative, so I'm just going to take that 5, divide it by 2, square it, and I get 25/4. So that's where that missing term is coming in. So see what you can do on these 9, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so I did the first 3, and I showed my work down here, so they're pretty straightforward. And so let's talk about what goes in these parentheses. So notice that, let's go up here. So notice when I took this one and divided it by 2, right there, that's the number that goes here and here. So let's see, I took that number and I divided it by 2, and that's that number that goes here and here. So I'm going to take this number and divide it by 2 right here. So that is x plus 1 squared. So when I took the 6 and divided it by 2, I got a 3. So it's going to be x minus 3 squared. And when I took this 4 and divided it by 2, I got a 2. So it's going to be x plus 2 squared. Something else I want to point out is these next 6 are kind of yucky. So they all deal with like fractions and just, well, a lot of them do, just kind of weird things. So I took this 7 divided by 2 and squared it, and I got 49/4. So when I do the, let's see, when I do the factor form of it, it's going to be x minus something squared. And so it's going to be 7/2, x minus 7/2 squared. Okay, so see if you can do 5 through 9. Okay, so let's talk about these next 6. So I think that number 5, number 6, and number 9 are kind of confusing because we're starting out with a fraction. So remember, we're going to divide by 2. So when you divide a fraction by a number, you multiply it by its reciprocal. So that's where this step is coming in, right here, and right here, and right here. And then I just simplified it. So once I simplified it, I got 1/5. So I knew it was x plus 1/5 squared here. And then I squared it to get this number here, which was 1/25. So basically, like what's going to happen is you are going to have to figure out this term in order to get it to this, so we can eventually solve it. Okay, so we have 4 more problems, and we are going to dig into really what this looks like. So the first thing I do when I come to a problem like this is I figure out, is this the number I want? So let's figure out what that number is. So I'm going to take 6 and divide it by 2 and then square it. So I have 3 squared, which is 9. So that's definitely not 9. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this 7 over. So I'm just going to add 7 to both sides and move it over. And then I'm going to put that number in that I want. So remember that number was 9. And so I'm going to put a 9 in both places. So once I have that, then I can factor it into that perfect square trinomial. So it's going to be x plus 3 squared equals 16. Now it looks like this problem that we did at the very beginning, this one. And so I'm just going to simply take the square root of both sides. And I get x plus 3 equals plus or minus 4. And then solve for x. So I have -3 plus 4, that's x equals 1. -3 minus 4, x equals -7. Okay, so this one with the 2 in front of it, that kind of complicates things a little bit. The first thing you have to do, you always want that coefficient of x squared to be 1 before you do completing the square. So I'm going to have to divide everything through by 2. So I have x squared plus 3/2 x minus 1 equals 0. Okay, now I can do the completing the square. So I'm going to take that middle term, so our b, and I'm going to divide it by 2, which means multiply by the reciprocal. So that's 3/4. And then I'm going to square that 3/4, which is 9/16. So that's definitely not 1. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So I have, I'm going to change colors, x squared plus 3/2 x, oops, plus something equals 1 plus something. And so that plus something is what we just found. So 9/16. And so when I come over here, that is going to be x plus something squared equals whatever this is added together. So let's see, if you type this in your calculator, if you do it by hand, so you have 16 over 16, 16 plus 9 is 25 over 16. Okay, and that's going to be really nice when we take the square root of that. So remember, this number right here is when we took this and divided it by 2. So I'm going to point out where that is, right there. So it's 3/4. So now I'm going to go through the problems and start solving for x. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. I got x plus 3/4 equals plus or minus, and I can take the square root of both of those, so that's 5/4. And then I'm going to subtract 3/4. So I get x equals negative 3/4 plus or minus 5/4. And then I'll just simplify that. Negative 3 plus 5, that's going to be 2/4, which is going to be 1/2. And negative 3 minus 5, which is going to be negative 8/4, which is negative 2. So those are my two answers. Okay, see if you can do this next one on your own. Okay, so hopefully you got it set up this far. So we moved that 7, or we divided everything by 2, so we moved that 7/2 over. And the special number that I wanted was 9/4. That's going to make it a perfect square trinomial. And so once I factored it, it was x plus 3/2 squared. So now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So this one is a little different because it's not nice numbers. I get x plus 3/2 equals plus or minus the square root of 23 over 2. So notice I can take the square root of that 4. So I'm going to subtract 3/2 from both sides. And I get x equals negative 3/2 plus or minus square root of 23 over 2. So we can either write it like that. We can write it where we combine it like that. It just kind of depends on the problem, what it's asking for, and all that good stuff. Okay, and so for this last one, this is very much like this first problem, so I'm going to turn you loose on it, but I am going to warn you that it has an I in it. Okay, so this was the only one that when I combined these, I got a negative number, so that's why the I came out. So I have I square root of 2. And that is it, guys.